Guys, today this is what we're going to do. We're going to play a little game of compare and contrast. So say this with me, compare and contrast. So we're going to do it again because you're going to play along with me this entire service. It's not going to work. We're going to compare and contrast. We're going to say compare and contrast. Because here's the deal. There's two groups of people that Jesus is talking to. Jesus is talking to this group of people, and he's talking to this group of people. We'll get to that in a second. And then he tells a story. He tells a parable, which is just a story with a point. And he represents this group of people with a person in the parable. And he represents this group of people with a person in the parable. And you won't get what the parable is saying unless you compare and contrast the two, right? So this is what it says at the beginning. Let's kind of nail that down. It says, now the who? The tax collectors and the who? The sinners. Okay. The tax collectors and the sinners, these are the guys, they're like, listen, I'm going out partying every weekend. We are going to Vegas, and I don't even want to remember what happened there. You're like, you know, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. But if you can't remember, of course it's going to stay in Vegas, right? So it's like I want to throw that kind of party, you know, try to get back to work Monday morning, right? This is that group. Now, for those of you that know the parable, which son, the younger son or the older son, represents the tax collectors and the sinners? The what? The younger son, right? And what was the younger son doing? They were all what? Gathering around. So here's the deal. I don't know if y'all have been around this Jesus thing for a while. I don't know if you've been around the Gospels, but sinners really liked Jesus, like a lot. Like sinners were constantly drawn to Jesus. They were like, let's get that guy to come to our party. Not only can he do miracles, that would be amazing, right? But like this dude is awesome. They wanted to be around him. But there was another group there. It says, but the who? And the who? Teachers of the law. Okay, so these are the guys who went to church, went to grace groups. They followed the speed limit. They helped old ladies across the street, right? These are well respected in society. Okay, so he tells a parable about this group. Which group is this represented by? The younger son or the older son? The what? The older son, right? And here's my question. What was this group doing? It says the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were doing what? Muttering. They were like, this dude, this Jesus dude is hanging out with the tax collectors and the sinners. What were they doing? Now, here's the kicker. Shanta, I'm going to get it right this time. You ready? Okay. I got this wrong. I went to public school, so I really struggle with right and left, so this is left. Okay, here's what I want you guys to do. I want everyone to look to the people at your right. Turn your head. Look at them. Now turn your head back around and look at everybody on your left. Now look straight back at me. Here's my question. What do you see? Other than extremely beautiful people, what do you see? Here's the answer. Most of you in this room are religious, church-going, Bible-believing, law-abiding, respected citizens. So here's the question. In this room, which brother do most of us look like? The who? The older brother. You see, this parable is about the older brother, for the older brother, and everybody say this with me. We are the older brother. Everyone say, oh snap. Oh snap. Okay, good. Right. So let me show you. Here's the deal. For most of you, there's some younger brothers in here, right? My sons are here, but most of you, right? Most of you love you. The other one's not even in here. He's like, I'm skipping out on the sermon, right? This is the way it goes. I'll preach to him later on. Corner in his room. Hey, listen, point number 5. No. So here's what you need to do. We need to compare and contrast for you to get what Jesus is trying to throw down here, okay? So let's start at the beginning of the story. The younger brother comes to the father. Y'all remember this. Comes to the father, says, Father, I wish you were dead. Give me my inheritance. So the father gave him his inheritance, and then what did he do? It says in verse 13, not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, and say it with me, set off for a distant country. Here's the thing. This should be obvious, but being in a distant country means that he's not with the father. And in the parable, what that means is when you are not with the father, you are lost. You with me so far? So here's the deal. The younger son is separated from the father, and he's what? He's lost, right? Here's the deal. Where's the older son? We know that a lot less. It says this in verse 25. It says, meanwhile, the older son was where? In the field. The father was still at home. The older son is at work. You with me? And in the parable, if you're separated from the Father, you are lost. So compare and contrast. Both sons are separated from the Father, and both sons are what? Lost. That's the first thing you need to see. Compare and contrast. Second thing you need to see, it says, go back to the younger son. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, Father, say it with me, give me my stuff. Give me my share of the estate. Give me my property. I got a party to go to, right? And we talked about this 2 weeks ago, compare and contrast. We said, listen, the younger son wanted the father's things, not just the father. I wish you were dead. Give me my stuff. I'm going to go head out, right? All right. Compare and contrast. What about the elder son? It says in verse 29. But the elder son answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you. I've never disobeyed your orders, yet you never what? Gave me. The first son says, give me my stuff. The second one says, you never gave me my stuff. What you need to see here is this. Both sons wanted the father's things and not just the father, right? So far, both sons are lost. And both sons want that. They're going about very different ways of doing it, but they both want the same thing from the father, right? But here it is, compare and contrast. The younger son is far from home. The younger son has cussed his dad out. The younger son has taken the stuff. He's run off. He's penniless. He's pitiful. He's living in the streets. He's like, my best chance of survival is to go back home to my dad, right? And what does he do? It says this. The younger son got up, and say this with me, he went to his father. And what does his father say? His father says, this son of mine was dead, and he's what? He's alive again, right? He was lost, and now he's what? Found. So in the parable, if being apart from the father means you're lost, the younger son is reunited with the father, and he's what? He's saved. Let's check into the older brother. You see, the older brother is at work. No, work is closer to home, but work is still home. And he's not penniless. He's got money in his pocket. He's got an Amex. He's got a Visa there, right? He's got a couple of $100 bills. I don't know who carries cash anymore. We're a cashless society, but he's got a couple of $100 bills in there, right? He's got a suit on. Looks more like the bishop than like me, right? Younger son, older son, right? And he's respected by society. The mayor shakes his hand, right? And so right? When he does all that, when the father comes out to him and says, son, 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 and starts to reason to him, what does he do? It says in verse 28, the older brother became angry, and say this with me, he refused to go in. Do you see it? Both sons are lost. They're away from the father. And both sons wanted the father's stuff, and not just the father. But here's the difference. The younger son is reunited with the father and he's saved, while the older son remains lost. Now here's a follow-up question that's not necessarily in a text, but I think is one of the most terrifying parts of this church, people. Why was the younger son saved and the older son not? I think the answer is simply this. The older son didn't know he was lost. You see, it's obvious if you're the younger son. It's obvious if you cuss your dad out, you know, and you're like, I wish you were dead. Give me my stuff. And your dad's like, oh, okay, here's your stuff. And then you stomp off, you're like, see ya, I'm never going to see you again. Run off to Vegas, blow all your money. You're living on the street. You're starving. You're like, well, I guess my only solution is to come home. You come home with your tail between your legs. It's obvious that you're lost. But if you're the older son, church people, you have a job. You have good morals. God has rules, and I follow said rules. And they don't follow said rules, but I follow said rules. And you do the right thing, and I go to church. It is very hard to know you are lost if you are the older son, and we are the older brother. And you may think to yourselves, I don't know, Josh. I don't know if this is true of me. I don't know if I'm feeling what you're laying down. Well, here's the deal. Let me show you a couple of characteristics of the older son. We see this in the passage. It says this about him. It says the older brother became what? Angry, right? You see, here's the deal. Older brother served the father, but there's an underlying anger against God. We think to ourselves, God, I have worked for you. I have prayed to you. I have come to church. I'm a part of this. I've done all these things. I deserve a good life. You owe me a good life. And when God doesn't give us what we want, when we want it, and as fast as we want it, we start to get angry at God. And notice the second thing. It says, the older brother became angry. He refused to go in. So his father went out and pled with him. But he answered his father and says, look, all these years I've been what? Slaving for you. You see, older brothers serve the father, but without any joy. Church folks, do you think to yourself, listen, I'm here, I'm serving, I'm giving, I'm hanging around these people, but I don't like it. Every time I serve, I'm like, I've got to go serve again. Every time I give, I'm like, I've got to go give again. Father, I am slaving for, I'm drudgery after drudgery year, I'm slaving for you. Here's what's interesting, compare and contrast. What's interesting is this. The younger son comes back to the father and says, Father, make me a slave, right? You remember this? Let me be a slave. And the father says, no, you are a son. And the older son comes to the father and says, Father, I'm your son. But inside, he's a slave. Inside, he's a slave. And so we have the son, and he's angry, and he serves the father without joy. But the third thing he says is this. He says, look, you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this what? Son of yours. That's the only way to say that. You got to point your finger. When this son of yours, right? You with me? Father. Older brothers serve the father, and we feel superior because we say, Father, I'm hardworking. Father, I've gone through your Bible, and I know what you desire. I know your rules. I know your morals. I'm doing a good job, not like these people around me. These people around, even the people of the church. I mean, the people outside are bad enough, but the other people at Grace United, they are, I mean, have you seen them, right? And and I'm the good child. Okay, listen, people. There's bad news and good news in this parable. Bad news, but here's the deal. You can't see the good news until you see the bad news. So here's the bad news. We're about to get good news. That's the good news. Here's the bad news. The bad news is this. The older brother is just as lost as the younger brother. Here's the bad news. The older brother just wants the father's stuff, not the father. They're just going about it different ways. Here's the bad news. The older brother refuses to come home, and he remains lost. And here's the bad news, church folks. Most of us are the older brother, but there is good news. There is good news. Let me turn this thing around. But this is the biggest question, I believe, in this passage for us. And here's the question. What does it cost the father to bring the younger prodigal home? I'll give you a second. Think about it, right? Most of y'all have heard the story before. Think about it. What does it take the father to bring him home? He got him a what? Like a robe, right? What else? He got him a ring. What else did he do? Right, slippers, fatted calf. He threw him a party. He gave him some presents. He dressed him back up, right? You're like, well, that's what it cost him. I don't know what it is in today's money, but a couple of $1,000s. That's what it cost him. Yeah, that's true, but that's not what you're supposed to be getting. We talked about this 2 weeks ago, and I'm sorry to throw antiquity on you, but if you don't understand what Jesus is talking about, then you won't get what he's throwing down at all. Here's the deal. He talks about what's called the law of primogeniture, and this is what happened. In Jesus' day, now don't be confused. This is not the Bible. Jesus doesn't teach this, but it's the culture he lived in. What would happen is the inheritance of a father would be handed down to their sons, the sons of the father. But the eldest son of the father would get a double portion of the inheritance because the eldest son was meant to hold the family together, to take care of the family, to take care of the property. He's going to be the new patriarch, and so he gets a double inheritance. So I brought this up 2 weeks ago. Here's how it looks. In our culture, I've got 4 kids. I've got 2 boys, 2 girls. My boys are the oldest, my girls are younger. So what would naturally happen in our culture is I would give each one of them a fourth of what, right? We went over this 2 weeks ago. A fourth of my inheritance, whatever that happens to be when I die. In Jesus' day, the girls get nothing, and the boys, again, not what Jesus taught was happening in Jesus' culture. The girls get nothing, and so the 2 boys are left in my family. My eldest, Gabriel, would get 2/3 of it, and my youngest, Miles, would get 1/3 of it. And this is what it looks like in the parables. In the parable, there are 2 sons. The older son gets 2/3 of the inheritance because he's meant to hold the family together, to take care of everything. The younger son would get 1/3. Only there's a problem. If you go back to the beginning of the parable, the younger son has already what? Received his inheritance and done what? Spend it all. That's gone. You with me? So back to the question. What does it cost the father to bring the younger prodigal son home? Think about it. Every ring, every robe, every slipper, every dollar, every coin, every cattle, every blade of grass, every acreage, every house belongs to who? The older brother. That's his stuff. The only way for the father to bring the younger brother back, the only way he can do it is at the expense of the older brother. And how did the older brother feel about it? He was what? Angry. Everyone say he was angry. Thank you. We're playing a game here. You're talking, I'm talking, we're talking together. So here's the deal. But here's the deal. Jesus is setting you up. You didn't know Jesus is setting you up, but Jesus is setting you up. He tends to do that to religious people. He sets them up, and then they fall into the trap. Because here's the setup. At the beginning of it, right, we said this. Hey, listen, this is what was going on. There's tax collectors and sinners. They were gathering. There's the Pharisees. They were muttering. It says, then Jesus told them this parable, verse 3. And the very next thing he does is he tells a parable. It's not the parable we've been going over. It's the parable of the sheep. Let me walk you through it. Suppose one of you, here's the first parable. Suppose one of you had 100 what? And you lost one. Wouldn't you leave the 99 in the wilderness and do what? Go after the lost one until you what? Found it. And when you found it, you can be sure that you put it across your shoulders, you rejoice, you go home, call all your friends and neighbors and say what? Celebrate with me. Why? Because I've found my lost. And you say, count on it. There's more joy in heaven over one sinner's rescued life than over 99 good people in need of no rescue. Here's what you need to see. In the first parable, there was something that was lost and it's found. It's a what? And there's somebody who went searching. It's who? And he did what? He called for a celebration. All right, that's the first parable. But the second parable he teaches, here's parable number 2. It says, or, parable number 2, imagine there's a woman who has 10 what? And so she loses a coin. Won't she light a lamp and do what? Scour the house, doing what? Looking in every nook and cranny until she finds it. And when she finds it, you can be sure that she'll call her friends and neighbors and say what? Celebrate with me. I found my lost coin. Count on it. That's the kind of party that God's angels throw every time one lost soul turns to God. And then you turn to the third parable, which is our parable, the parable of the prodigal son. And Jesus is setting you up because in each one of the parables, something was lost and was found. So in the second parable, something was lost and found. It was a... And someone went searching in the second parable, it's the, and she called for a, and when we get to the parable of the prodigal son, right, something was lost and was found, and it's a, and there was a celebration that was called for, but no one went out to get the son. And you're supposed to be asking the question, who should have gone out and searched for the prodigal son? You with me? You see, if the elder brother in the story were a true elder brother, he would be like the shepherd in the first parable. He would have gone out for the one. If the elder brother in the second parable were a true elder brother, he would have been like the woman. He would have gone out, searched for the coin, and come back and said, let's celebrate. It's the elder brother's job in this culture to keep the family together. The elder brother would have gone out. The elder brother would have found his brother. The elder brother would have, at his own expense, clothed his elder brother, put shoes on his feet, put a ring on his finger, dragged him home, brought him home, and the elder brother would have gone to the father and said, Father, celebrate with me, for this son of yours was lost, and now he's found. But the problem is this. The younger brother didn't have a true elder brother. He had a Pharisee. The religious folks muttered, "Why are you hanging out with people like them?" And Jesus tells us this parable precisely to say, I am the true elder brother. Jesus is the brother who left his house in heaven and went searching for the lost sons and daughters of the king. And he came down at his own expense and spent on you not coins and sandals and shoes, but his very blood and his very life. And he goes back to the Father because he is the true elder brother. He takes us back to the Father and say, Father, celebrate with me, for these sons and daughters of yours have been found and they were lost. And here's the deal. He will clothe us with his righteousness. We will be crowned, and he will sit us around a table, a feast. It's called the Feast of the Lamb in the book of Revelation, where the angels will rejoice. What was lost is now found. In the call today, this morning, is to the older brothers. Because here's the deal. There are many of us in church. We're in church, but we're very far from God because we are angry with him. And we feel like a slave to him. We have joyless service in his prayer. Like, I'm doing it, but I don't like it. But since I'm doing it, because I'm working for you, you're going to give me my stuff. We want his stuff and not necessarily him. Watch me give, Father. Watch me serve, Father. But just make sure you line up the blessings, because if you don't do it when I tell you to do it, this ain't going to work out. And you look down at the people at your right and your left, and I'm not even talking about the people who don't believe in Jesus. Listen, they are lost. How dare we look down at them? They don't know. But you come to church, and you look down on your brothers and sisters in Christ, and you say, don't these people know? I'm so much better than them. These sons and daughters of yours. But but here's the good news. The Father comes out to the older brothers, just like he comes out to the younger brothers. And he invites us in. He's calling you to come home and to take his hand and to take your place as his sons and daughters. And do not be blinded to your lostness. Don't let your religiosity blind you. Don't let your work for him blind you. Don't let your anger blind you. Come home to the Father.